Well, welcome back, everybody who's joining us today live and anybody who's watching this recording. I am again Jesse Coffino, and I'm joined by my colleague, Krystina Tapia. We have the incredible good luck and good fortune to have with us today Dr. Denisha Jones. She's the director of the Art of Teaching program at Sarah Lawrence College. She's also co-director of Defending the Early Years, an incredible organization that we encourage you to check out their webpage. There's just a wealth of incredible resources for play at home, for how to talk to children and work with children around questions of equity and justice, and even how we talk about what's happening right now in the United States. Denisha's just a tireless advocate for children, for families, for play. And yeah, we're incredibly lucky to have her join us today. Dr. Denisha Jones was able to join us in Anji. She traveled to China, and for the last year or so, she's been a part of a smaller group of educators that has been really thinking about the ideas of true play in Anji play, how we describe them, and what their implications are. So welcome, Denisha. I'd love to hear from you. What connected you to Anji? You know, you're working in America, you're working with a lot of educators, you're advocating for children's rights, and there's this thing going on in China. Why?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Jesse and Krystina. So I have to give all the credit to a fabulous woman named Susan Oxshorn. So we've been colleagues for a while now. Susan's a big supporter of my work. My role at Defending the Early Years is a big result of her efforts to make sure that my voice is being spread. I literally get this email from her and it says Anji Play Fellowship. And I see the words play and I'm like, I gotta read this. And then I reply, I'm like, Susan, is this for real? And she goes, yeah, and then she tells me, I think we met, we ended up, before I moved to New York, we saw each other about once or twice a year or so. I think we ended up having, a meal pretty soon after that. And she tells me about her experience going to Anji. And I mean, the way she told the story, I was then telling it like I had been there, right? The way she talked about the observations of play and how beautiful it was, right? When I was trying to explain to people about this program I was joining. So she told me about it and I said, I kept looking at it and I'm like, I gotta figure this out. It sounds like a really good opportunity to get together with people who are really into play and to learn about, how in Anji, China, they're doing play. I remember going to the first retreat and I was like, I don't know any of these people. Like, this is so weird. And it was amazing. Like, we had the most amazing time, as you both know. And it's been a really great experience. And I'm so honored that I got to go to the True Play conference in Anji and see it for myself, because that was the change, right? I think hearing about it, reading about it, watching the videos were great, but it wasn't until I was there. And I didn't even, I haven't gotten the full study tour experience, but I saw enough, right? I visited, I don't know how many schools you guys took us to, like 6, 7, 8 maybe. And so it was a really good opportunity. And so now I'm sold into this idea that we can have a true play revolution, right?
And what is that? I mean, what does a true play revolution look like?
So I think for me, it's kind of like I'm trying to get people to understand that a lot of the problems we're seeing in education is because we're not embracing not even just play as a type of education, but now I'm seeing play as a mechanism for development, right? I'm teaching a theories of development class this summer, which, it's a standard graduate education class. And one of the things we ask the students to do as they're learning about the various theories is to identify what is the mechanism for development in that theory, right? Piaget's theory, how does he explain the mechanism of development? And he really looked at experience and building upon the cognitive structure, the assimilation, accommodation, those sorts of things. Vygotsky was the zone of proximal development, right? That's his mechanism of development. And now I'm seeing play, if you allow children to actually play, right? Real true play, that is the mechanism of development for young children. And I think that's revolutionary because we don't see it that way. In early childhood, we see play as a break from real work, as a reward for being good in school, or as something children do when they don't have anything else scheduled, right? But it's actually not really seen as, no, this is how young children develop a whole host of skills, right? And so I think that part of it is revolutionary, and it's global because it's not just happening in Anji, but that's one of the places it's happening. I think we've seen play work and the work of in Europe and in the European countries that have done that. I think they've also recognized that. Norway, Sweden, all of the Scandinavian countries that have been a part of the good childhood and promoting play. And we're seeing it here in the United States too, right? There's a lot of push for loose parts and that type of play. And so I think, but it's still not widespread enough, right? We still have people saying, oh, you know, our kids don't have time for play. They need to learn more. And I'm saying, no, if we let them play more, they will learn more, because, and they'll learn better, right? They'll learn, you know, the skills that are really hard to master unless you're really engaged in it on your own.
And I think that, you know, this brings up an interesting question for us, which is that play, just the word, is sort of fraught. We're always thinking about whose play are we talking about here. You know, a lot of times you see play that is structured towards specific outcomes. And we go to conferences and there's this assumption that we all have the same definition of play and we're all kind of on the same page. And then we can talk about how to scaffold or how to make things more playful or how to get kids to look happy learning certain things. And so I think a challenge for us has been sort of like, no, we're talking about something specific here. And I don't know if that's something that you've encountered in your work, an advocacy work, that not everybody thinks of play the same way.
No, they don't. And I do this lesson with my pre-service students all the time in different classes where I ask them to go around the room and talk about, give examples of how they played at school when they were younger, how they played at home when they were younger, and how they play today. Right. And I want them to flush those out. And then we look at them and we look at what they have in common. And I'm really trying to get them to see that play is not defined as something. It's just got these kind of characteristics, right? You do it because you want to do it. You're intrinsically motivated to do it. No one's forcing you to do it. So, you know, playing a sport that's organized by adults is not what we mean by play, because you may want to do that, but that's still slightly different. It's not fully intrinsic, right? In the way that we're talking about. It's pleasurable. Right? You typically enjoy it. I saw someone in a group yesterday said play is frustratingly fun. And that is my new word. Because sometimes you are frustrated, but you're still having fun. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it, right? You'd kind of walk away from the experience. And so we try to look at those characteristics. And then also thinking about play as adults, because we don't really think about how we play, right? Sometimes if someone said, well, exercise, that could be your form of play if you're someone who goes running and jogging and you're doing it just for yourself, right? And that's how you engage, right, in your body. That might be a form of adult play. Video games, hanging out with friends, like all of that, right? And so we think about how does play evolve from when you're younger to you're an adult, and why? And I've had interesting conversations with people saying things like, well, like I tell myself when I feel like I'm playing, I tell myself something's wrong, I should be working. So there's this idea that whenever you're not fully busy, then there's a problem. And that starts when you're young, and then people impose it on themselves in school. But I think it's important, and what I really got from my time in China with Ms. Chung and her presentation was describing play in the sense of what play is not, right? I still fall back on that, well, false play, because I think that's, for people to understand what we're talking about, they have to understand what we're not. And what we're not talking about is the traditional play that's here, the toy that you can only do this with for this time in this space in the classroom. And I'm going to come and I'm going to ask you questions to build upon what you're doing and point out the learning that you should be developing. That is play, but it's not the play that we're talking about, right? So now I can use that language to kind of get them to see how that is a type of play, but what we're talking about is this open-ended experience where the time is yours, the space is yours, the materials are there, and you can do whatever you want, and we will support you in that, and we're not going to hamper you. We're not going to tell you don't do that. We're going to offer support when you need it, and we're going to step back and let you do it, right? And that's a totally different experience.
Yeah, and I mean, you have a JD, you're an attorney, you have a PhD. I worked for years in the arts and then in translation and interpretation. And I imagine, and I don't want to speak for you, but like, you seem deeply and joyously engaged in what you're doing. You're taking risks, you're reflecting. I think that sometimes we look at play as a particular like manifestation of a physical act when, talking about just joy, like what brings you joy? What gets you so engaged that like nothing else matters in that moment? And like, are you solving problems? Are you taking risks? And I think at the end of the day, it's like, are you discovering something, And for us going to China, we discovered this thing, seeing a teacher is incredibly capable, or seeing a child is incredibly capable. There's kind of this quality of discovery that's taking place.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think when you experience that, it starts to seep into the rest of your world, right? Yeah, I do want to do work that brings me joy. So when I'm doing work that's not bringing me joy, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. But then, like yesterday, as packed as my schedule was, most of that was bringing me a lot of joy to talk about, to think about, to do those things. And I think, I will say, I feel like my generation was the last one that got real free play, right? I mean, we were gone, up out the house, gone. My mom had no clue where we were. We were in the woods building forts. We were exploring tunnels. We were doing that kind of freedom. And I think that then it grounds you as you get older, if if you're able to hold on to it, right? But like, then you want that kind of, I've always wanted that kind of freedom in my work, right? To do the things that make me happy. And I understand that it's work, right? Someone's paying me to do it and I need to be producing something, but it should also bring me joy, and it should also have me highly engaged, and it should be something that I can reflect upon, right? And I think people who don't have those experiences, maybe they're not able to bring that into what they're doing.
Yeah.
And Denisha, we have here from our friend Susan Osborne. She has a question. She says, what about liberation and freedom?
That was what I was about to do. Thank you.
Yeah, it became such it was just hard to put into words, but I'm at these schools, and again, I still can't wrap my head around the space. Like, it was just massive. We're just like walking in these like half outdoor kind of indoor spaces, and you turn the corner and there's a whole nother space over here, and there are all these children. I mean, some of these kindergartens have like 500 kids, right? So they're really big spaces. And as I just was walking around and just watching children, I realized what all these children had in common, other than that they live in Auntie China, was that they were free. They were engaging in the most free experience I'd ever seen young children engage in. I mean, I watched a little boy take all of these ladders and lay them up a hill and then come down off them on a sled, right? And like, he was just doing it by himself. There was no one over there. Sorry, I thought I had a picture that I could put up on there. And he just lays them all down, and there are breaks in it. It's not working well. He's readjusting. And literally, I'm watching him and I'm like, he's gonna come too fast and he's gonna crash into this wall behind me. And so there's no one really there because he's just doing the thing. And I'm like, and I kind of like try to motion to him, like, I stand in the way, like, are you sure? And he looked at me like, move. And so and he literally came sliding down. He turned the sled and he just looked at me with this big smile on his face, and he trucked back up the hill. And I'm like, he just has the freedom to do that and to make it work for him. And then I started to notice how all the other children were just free to do what they wanted, right? And it was just very, like Susan said, eventually you're going to cry. And I did, because we don't have that. Our children are not that free. The liberation part really came in one of the presentations. I'd have to go back to the article I wrote up on it, but one of the ladies who presented after Ms. Chung, she talked about the need to liberate the minds of the policymakers and the people to really understand why this was so important. And that's when it clicked, and it was like, it's not just the children who are liberated, but the teachers become liberated in their constraints and how they see children, what they expect of them, what they think they can do. And that, like, then it all came together, right? That yes, there's love and joy and risk and engagement and reflection, and there's also freedom and liberation for both the children and the adults. And I think I didn't talk to the parents a lot, but I saw some of them who came to pick up their children there, and you can tell that there was some of that with them too. Like, they know their children are being cared for, and so they're free to let their child be. There's nobody telling them, oh, you need to make sure your kid is reading and you need to do all this, right? And they're kind of liberated from thinking of all the things their children can't do, and just focus on, is your child happy? And they know their kids are happy, right? They take them there every day. They pick them up. Like, you can tell that they're kind of like, yeah, this is great for our kids, right? So you can see it in everybody, that idea of freedom and liberation.
And I think there's this interesting question that's also brought up when you compare this to other play-based pedagogies or other views of play, and that's the role of the adult, right? So, it's one thing for a child to have that freedom. It's another thing to say, well, your job is to witness that freedom. And your job is to understand that freedom. And your job is to tell those children that freedom is the most important thing that's happening in this space. And so there's a liberation there for children. There's a liberation for teachers where they're not implementing some view of the child from the top, where their source of knowledge is the child's freedom. That, like, the child's freedom is the core basis for the teacher's understanding of children and of their own practice sort of as teachers. And so a lot of what I see in the work of teachers or the work of schools or the work of systems is sort of these stories that we tell about children, or these ways that we have of looking at children that are kind of outside of what's happening for the child in that moment of freedom, right? It's sort of like, okay, so why is that freedom important? Because X, Y, and Z, and how can we make that freedom look more like this thing that we look at? Or in Anji, you know, after that experience of freedom, well, then what's next? Let's hear the kids talk about that freedom. Let's have them draw pictures of that freedom. Like let's listen to what they're saying. And so I think that there is this really great danger the second you start interfering that, the second you start policing behavior in any way, then like all of those biases or all of those things that we hold in ourselves about what children should or shouldn't be doing based on any number of factors start entering into there. So, you know, you liberate the child by getting rid of the adult's needs about the child, but then you're also telling the child that you're good, you're great, you're valuable. Like what you're doing right now is so valuable. And, you know, even in places that embrace play, you do still see teachers coming in because they want to see something happen next, or they're anxious about what that interaction between those children says about that child or that teacher.
And they don't know their role, right? This is what I'm realizing after the end of this entire leadership experience. And it's been, you know, it was different for me because I don't work with young children every day. I train teachers. So I've been listening to everyone talk about their experience, those who are implementing Anji, whether it's in Wisconsin or it's in Budapest or it's in Vietnam, right? Hearing it, it's what I realize is that we are not preparing teachers for this role, right? I've been doing early childhood teacher preparation for 16 years, right? And we are not preparing teachers for this role where it's like, your job is not to be in charge of what the child is doing 24, you know, the whole time you're together. Your job is to step back, to provide the love that they need so that they can take these risks, to observe what they're doing, and then to allow them to tell you what they were doing and to scaffold that whole conversation. I mean, again, I don't know a single word that was said when we sat there in the reflection section at the conference, right? We didn't have an interpreter, but for 40 minutes, we watched a group of kids who are sweaty, it had been hot, sit in these chairs and talk about this play experience. And literally, I mean, I was just watching their body movements. I go into classrooms and I observe children sitting in circle time all the time. And I see a lot of within 3 minutes, stop poking me, stop touching me, you know, and they're off task and somebody's got to come. Not once. I mean, every now and then a kid looked back at us because, you know, you're talking and there's like 100 adults behind you, but they were really back engaged. But then one by one, they kept going up to the front and they're like, hammering this point home, whatever it was, about why that experiment didn't work out the way they wanted to. And you could tell the teacher was like inviting their discussion, maybe kind of like summarizing what they said, asking other kids what they thought, but not imposing on them. I mean, honestly, any adult could have solved that issue in 2 minutes. There was a gap so big that the tire could not connect to the neck. We saw that, right? But that's not what it was about. It wasn't about telling them that. It was about hearing them explain what was happening, what they were doing. And you don't really, teachers, that's a different role for teachers, right? I couldn't do that. I would have just been like, guys, fix the gap, like just make the piece a little longer and then it'll go, right? Because you're told to provide children with information, to ask them questions, to help them problem solve, not to just let them have a 40-minute discussion amongst themselves about what was happening and what they can do tomorrow when they go, or later that day when they go back out there, right? So now I'm thinking, how do we, in teacher ed, how do we then prepare teachers for this role? And it's been done in some places, you know. My good friend Keisha Reed is the owner of a Discovery Play Center in Poolsville, Maryland. And one time I asked her, I said, what do you do about lesson planning? Because if you run a play program, you're not lesson planning. And she was like, no, we observe children play and then we document the learning that happened. And that's a big switch, right? It's not so much I have these objectives and I have these goals and I have these procedures that I want you to do and I have these materials. It's like, I'm going to watch you and I'm going to say it as the professional, wow, you just engaged in this and you did that and that's related to this and this and that. So it's like the reverse, right? You're like flipping the whole lesson planning experience. And I think preparing teachers for that role is really key if we're going to get this global, right? If we're going to get more people to buy into this.
Well, it's flipping the entire model, right? Because what you're saying is play, the child's play is the most important thing that's happening today. And everything that we're doing today is going to come back to it. You're going to play for 2 hours. We're going to talk about it for 2 hours. Like Jesse was saying, you're going to draw about it. And again, it's not about teaching that lesson. It's not about the teachers being there to be the the contributor of all knowledge. It's really like, it doesn't really matter if it's right or wrong. This is their space to truly discover the things that are really interesting to them. You're right, it is a huge shift to teachers. A lot of the teacher training programs that I've been through, I was a teacher for many years, like it's all about how are you going to lead that circle time so that children can learn their math concepts, or how are you going to do the calendar in an innovative way? Because, if you don't do the calendar with preschoolers, they're never going to learn the day of the week.
They're going to learn the days of the week if you don't spend every day telling them today is, I did that. I taught kindergarten. I wrote it on a paper every day. I hit a few letters to see if they could pick up on it. That's what we were trained in. I thought that was good, right? But I also let them play in the classroom for an hour a day, right? And that was actually the best time that they had and that I had. And I think I didn't stay teaching as much because I realized, like, why can't we just play all the time? Because they're actually, and then I did like going over to them and talking about their play and like engaging, because then it really shifted how you see them, right? That's the idea. It's like when you're not trying to teach them, when you're not assuming they don't know this, and it's your job to make them know this, when instead you say, they have an idea of what they want to do, and it's my job to like witness, just bear witness to this experience, and then, reflect with them on it, right? And then think about, and to me, it was such a higher level of thinking that the teachers are doing, right? It's not that they're just, just warm bodies, making sure nobody falls, right? I actually have to spend so much time then thinking through the play. What are the children doing? What else, could the teachers do then support that play or support that thinking and support that development? Is that a change to the environment? Is that introducing new materials? Is that kind of reminding them that this is what they were working on, and they want to come back to it? And so it's a shift, and people think play is so unstructured. They think it's not, that there's no role for the teacher. And, I'm like, either you're playing with them or you're observing them play. And either one is a valid role, except you don't want to overstep your bounds if you're playing with them, right? I have to make sure I watch, because I'll take over and then I'll be like, sorry guys, that's not my job, but I'm really excited. So I do say that with a caveat, but yeah, it's really important to just think about, putting the child in the front and center of leading this experience. And your job is to support, not too much, but enough so that they're able to do what they want to do. And then really think about, what does this mean in terms of their development, in terms of where they're going and their interest, and really sharing that with their parents and sharing that with the rest of the world who's worried because they're not writing their letters, right? Well, this is what they're capable of doing. And this is what they do when they're given the freedom to do it. And it's important, right? It's important because it's what they want.
Yeah, so like rather than being an expert in what you've managed to get a child to do, you're becoming an expert in what that child can do in some sense. And, I think that just this idea of that scene you saw of children really listening to each other, you have to imagine that if children are used to being listened to, they're probably better at listening to other people. Like that's a value, right? And so if a teacher is talking constantly, like a child's gonna also want to be, taking over the space and, pushing other people out in some sense.
I wasn't quite sure, but I don't think all the children sitting there were in that play that they were talking about. Yeah. So you're literally sitting there listening and watching videos of a play happen that you weren't involved in. But that's okay, because you still want to hear about it and you want to be engaged in that other play experience, right? And I think that's really, because that went on for literally 45 minutes. I'm still shocked at that length of it, right? And they were still fully engaged in the conversation.
And I think part of that also comes down to what you described about the child owning that space with sliding. They're owning that reflective space too. So rather than a teacher saying, oh, what are the qualities of what you did, and then writing it on a board and making like a word circle and then trying to get the kids to all come to some consensus about a particular aspect of what they were doing, the kids are debating what they believed happened, right? Mm-hmm. Like what's important is that they have a high degree of control of that discourse as well. And I think there is research that's coming out to say that like children engaged in active debate is a much more powerful way to learn than trying to summarize what children are saying and then get everybody to sort of come to a consensus about, what's going on.
Yeah, children have, they have their own ideas of fairness and how to solve a problem, but we want to control that. Well, what if they don't solve the problem correctly? That's not on us. Look, if two kids can come to an understanding and you're kind of like, I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have gave in on that, but he does and he's happy with it, then let them figure that out, right? It's not our place, but we want to impose what they should do so much that we don't trust that they can handle it on their own, even when that means it looks different than we think it should at the end, right?
And that meme of like, the person's brain like getting to various levels of exploding, and then they've got like the laser shooting out of their eyes. Like it's like, kids can learn the calendar. like kids can learn the calendar better. Kids can create their own way of documenting time. And then like there's this mind blown. It's like kids' developed way of documenting time is more useful to them than the way you document time.
Exactly. Which is like, what are you trying to tell me? No, that's a really good point. And I do know that meme, and that's exactly what we're getting at. Like kids, kids can do this on their own, and it's what they need, and it's good for them in that moment, right? And that's all that should really matter. And I know that's hard for people to accept, but if you think about, our education system and the way we try and impose what we think children should know and should do, it's failed. It's a failed experiment. I mean, sure, it produced, for generations, it produced a solid middle class, but now we're not even doing that, right? We're taking away. And that's because we've seen the decline in that kind of free time that children had. If we kept it going, and the kids of my generation, the previous generations were able to, the younger ones were still able to have that opportunity for free play, but they don't even have that, right? And we're wondering why we're not getting the kind of results we want. I mean, it's so much more about questioning, well, what is it? Why are those the results we want? But if we at least focus on the child and let them lead for these, I mean, it could be forever, but can you give me the first 8 years of life? Like, let them lead, we could see different outcomes.
And again, I mean, I think a lot of the work that you're doing, a lot of the work that Susan is doing, a lot of the work that Defending the Early Years is doing, is when you see like specific modes of assessment or outcomes that become narrower and narrower to meet specific expectations that are defined based on like a limited view of the child's ability. In America, a limited view of the teacher's ability, right? That you're missing out this incredible depth and complexity and potential of children's thinking, right? And so similarly, what I've seen, and I'm sure that, you've experienced this too, is like a deprofessionalization of the field where it's like, just follow these instructions, do this thing, and then you get like the 0.5% bump in literacy, 2 years from now. When it's like,
that along with the like box curriculum, right? Like, oh, this is just going to give us all the answers. And once once teachers implement this, then, children are going to be super brilliant. But, at the end of the day, like, it's not what children need. It's focusing on all the wrong things.
Let me stop that for a second. Choose virtual background, none. All right. All we're trying to do is get children to fall along this curve, right? The bell curve. All we're doing is lining you up. You're going to fall somewhere in here. You're going to be in the low end, the middle, or the end. And that's all we're really doing in most of schooling, right? It's just trying to determine where you're going to fall, because we think that curve is fixed, because we think everybody belongs on that curve at some point. And because we believe those things, that's exactly what we get, right? We get children who fall along that curve because we set up that intention to begin with. And what we know, it's really dangerous, especially for children who have been marginalized in this country. The one thing that broke my heart the most was that I don't know if the true play revolution is going to happen for Black and brown children. And that's hard because they're not even getting like false play. Like a lot of the times they're getting no play, right? Ms. Chung has that picture of the back in the day when she first started and the kids are just sitting there, and it's like warehousing in an orphanage is what it looked like, where kids were just sent to a place. There was no play. That's what a lot of Black and brown children get today, right? They don't even get the opportunity to play in the sense of like in a public park or in these types of spaces, right? Or even, maybe it's in the classroom, but not even, right? We'll see a lot of children because they're being told, and I've had teachers reach out to me and say, well, my administrator says poor kids need less play because they're already behind, right? So there's this attitude, right, that they need more academic instruction. And it's like, no, they need more play than even other children, right? And this is hard for me, I think, for even parents, because unfortunately, the system has led parents to believe the same thing. And I think a lot of parents they don't realize the value in the play, but then they're also scared, right? What happens to their child when they get that kind of freedom and that kind of liberation? And is it going to prepare them for the realities of a world that doesn't value their humanity? And I understand that, but I also feel like it's the protection you need to survive in a world that doesn't value your humanity, right? You need that play to like be that foundation and be that base that allows you then to go out into that really harsh world. But how do we get parents to see that? How do we get other people who don't see that value, right, that don't think that that's what's going to happen, to at least give it a try, right? It can't hurt. I don't know anyone who got hurt because they had too much time to play, right? Like that doesn't usually really happen, right?
And I think something that Ms. Chung says, because people ask her, they're like, oh, well, how do you prepare the kids for primary school? Like, are you doing them a disservice by not? And she's like, you know what? Primary school is not my business. I'm responsible for these children, and their right is to be seen for who they are, to be heard, to experience joy and freedom, to be respected, like to be respected and trusted as people, and to be seen as competent, capable human beings, right? And that's unfortunately a controversial proposition in America. And like you're saying, systemically, just a denial of freedom to the youngest children. And what happens when you tell a child they can't move around, that their movement in space, their big movement, is a problem, that like what's expected is for them to be compliant and to obey top-down orders. I mean, that's a bad, I don't know. That's something that
it's all in the guise of we're doing what's best for this population of children, right? When it's not.
No, but it's sad because we don't have enough faith in not even in children, but in just in people, right? So one of the experiences I really love was seeing the kids paint all over everything, right? I'll just go back to this one. They paint on the rocks, they paint on the walls, right? They paint on everything, which is great. And again, I don't know if it was before I went to China, or I think it was after I came back from China. Keisha Reed posted a video of the kids painting the piano at her center, right? And I think they asked maybe, and they started doing it. And of course, the first thought is, oh, you can't let them do that. Then they'll paint a wall. Like they don't know the difference of painting the piano in a space that's theirs and not going home and painting the walls. They're not that, they know the difference. They're not crazy. They understand that I'm allowed to do that in this space, in this time, but that is not something I can do in this environment. They get that, right? Maybe not when they're toddlers, right? Toddlers don't, but these kids understand that. They're old enough to make that understanding. So we deny them experiences because we think you're not going to be able to tell the difference. But no, we should say, let them do these experiences so that they learn the difference, right? And yeah, some children will end up marking on a wall because they don't realize, but is that the end of the world, right? Then to have that experience, I think we just need to trust them a little bit more, right? And that's what I really saw with the risk, right? That comes in this kind of play, like trusting them to assess their own risk, right? There was this contraption and this girl's climbing on it, and I'm like, oh, it's not safe. Whereas an adult, it's not safe, and she knows it's not safe. She keeps getting off. She keeps readjusting. So I'm wondering what she's gonna do. All of a sudden, she yelled. 3 reinforcers came, held it steady. She ran across it, and she got over. So I mean, she knew that. She knew it wasn't safe. She knew she needed help, and she handled that. And she didn't need anyone to tell her what to do. And although I stood there and watched the whole thing, she never asked for my help. She didn't. She knows how to handle it. But in most places, she would have never been given that freedom to know that for herself. And so what does it mean when we deny children that freedom to know what you can handle on your own, right? And then we wonder why we don't have adults who recognize what they can do on their own, right? Because you never got that chance as a child. I knew what I could do on my own because I spent 8 to 10 hours during the summer away from my house, from my adults, and I had to get a sense of what I can handle on my own to know that, right? And if I never had those experiences, and how, who knows who I'd be today.
So that's that powerful, like the powerful in Anji, like the powerful addition of reflection, right? Like having even more space to think about, the implications of what you've done and sharing it with another child, because, children are learning from each other's discoveries. Yeah, I mean, again, there's just the thing that is so motivating for us. I was going to say so sad, but is really motivating for us, is that there are children in the United States that is thought that they can't handle freedom, like that, and that runs along the racial socioeconomic lines that have always been, you don't deserve or you can't handle freedom. Your freedom is dangerous to us, and that's like it's really important that like the CEO of a tech company that's sending their kid to a Waldorf school isn't trying to scale their app for poor kids because they're going to fix some deficit or like fix some broken child. It's like scale the joy, right? Like the freedom that you think your child should have is what we want to see other children to have.
And I always wonder, because I mean, you have children, Jesse, and you're raising them to be free. And I also do wonder, like, well, okay, I know, like when you raise your child to like negotiate and to it gets to be a pain at some point where they think that they can negotiate everything. I think you've shared that meme that's like, something is a social construct, but bedtime is like real. And like there's I in one of my classes we talk about language modeling of parents. When parents reason with children and negotiate, you have to then realize they're going to throw it back at you, right? No, I don't have. They're going to use those, so it becomes harder but you do want your kids to have those skills, even if they're going to use it against you someday, right? So I wonder, like, if you're a parent, you're raising a child to be free, like, sure, you probably come up on time, but you do have to lay down the law, just like they have structure in true play classrooms. And there are times when you have to say, no, you can't do that. I'm not saying that anything goes and you can do whatever you want, but there are limits, right, that you do impose. And so I think it's a struggle. And for me, it's hard to say because I don't have children, so I don't know what to tell someone.
Yeah, I mean, Denisha, I don't have kids either, but I've worked with many, many families, and I've been really lucky to work with a lot of families who give their children a lot of freedom, that want their children to be outspoken, that want their children to, have an opinion. And then they realize, like, when their child is doing that and it's really hard, they like don't want that to happen, right? But then, like, I've had parents reflect, like, okay, well, those are our values. We have to like back them up. Like, yes, this is going to be hard, but like, if that's at the end of the day what we want for our children, we have to create situations where they have time to practice. And if that's with us, then it has to be with us. And we can't say, well, you should be opinionated at school, but not at home. Like that doesn't make any sense.
And I think that's the default a lot, right? You don't want it coming back on you. You're not prepared for when it comes back on you. And I get it. And you're not prepared and it happens, right? I did, my nephew lived with me for like a year and I wasn't prepared when he started asking me questions that I thought were too grown up. And I was just kind of like, but I was just honest. I said, I'm not prepared to answer that question right now. Let me think about it. No, I'm not going to lie, but I'm just not prepared to answer it at this moment, right? And I had to really think about what was my approach. And he respected that. He's like, okay. And then tried again a couple hours later when I had time to think about it, right? So yeah, it's hard, but it should be what we want. Like you said, Krystina, we should still want our children. If you want your children to have these values, then you've got to give them that space to have them, to model them, to practice them, and to embrace them, right?
And I think that from a parenting perspective, or even from a school perspective, that safety is really critical for children to take part in joyous play, to have a degree of self-regulation, to know what's going to happen next. And so, I kind of use the metaphor, like in Anji, you have walls and you have a security guard, right? And if you didn't have walls and a security guard, you couldn't have children own that space and be where they want to be. There wouldn't be the safety of keeping people out that you need to keep out, or keeping the kids in that you need to keep in, right? You also have like, we're going to show up at this time, and then we're going to play from this time to this time. And then, our transition will be really long. And if you still need to be out there playing, that's okay. But generally speaking, the expectation is you come in, because at this time, lunchtime happens and you have to wash your hands. And so it's creating that minimal structure. I think that the important thing is we don't say unstructured play or non-structured experience. It's what is the minimal level of structure that provides children with the safety to know that, that there are forces that are like, there are things that they do have to comply with, but those things they have to comply with are in response to their needs, right? So
it's not bad to comply when you've been for 2 hours. I mean, cleanup time, Anji, is magical. It's like 30 minutes of play cleanup. I mean, these kids are loving it and they're doing it. And I think, but part of that is that they know what they get, right? They know they had all this time. And so, but yeah, when you give a kid 40 minutes to play, and often they're not done, and you tell them you got to break up your play structure, of course you're going to get some resistance, right? But those kids were tired. I mean, sure, I'm sure some of them would have kept staying outside, but they had no problem. But even the process of it, right? They were just doing it in a way that was still playful, right? Getting the materials. They convinced me to carry some heavy stuff, and they thought that was hilarious. Like they were tricking me into cleaning up for them. So it was still this really playful experience to get, but it just worked. Like they all just did it and they were fine. I didn't see anyone lingering in the back. Like I'm the director of a preschool out there with one kid, like, okay, I can't, like, what can I do to convince you that now is the time to come inside, right? Like, we've all been in that situation where we got to get a kid inside and he doesn't want to come inside. I didn't see that in my couple of days visiting, right? I just didn't see that because I think there's enough respect for them that they respect the routine, they respect the structure, right?
And also, Denisha, they know that Yeah, that's not the normal for just one day. That's what's going to happen tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day. So if they didn't get to something, it's really not the end of the world because they'll get to it tomorrow, and they have that trust in their school and in their teachers that that freedom is not just something that happens for a particular hour or for a particular time. It happens all the time when they're there, right? Like they will always have that freedom to play. They will always have their experiences be at the forefront of everything that they're talking about.
And there's no artificial scarcity around activities that meet needs that are external to the child. So a child needs to have lunch. A child needs to wash their hands. Like a child needs to take a rest. Like a child needs to come inside. Like those structures or those transitions are based on an understanding and a reflection on the child's needs. So it's not like they're being asked to do something that doesn't make sense.
You all need to go to gym class right now. You all need go to the library right now. I don't want to go to the library. I want to keep doing what I'm doing, right? There's none of that, right? There's like, you need to do that you need to do. And I think, yeah, I can tell that they actually, that it gets, even the youngest ones seem to get that, right? And it's, but I think to Krystina's point, and they had so much time, right? It wasn't like, I mean, I lost track of time. Like you guys were telling us we had to go to the next school, and I'm like, but they get to keep playing. And it's like, when, and it's like, yeah, they got another 30, 45 minutes, who knows? But I mean, I think the blocks are what, an hour and a half, 2 hours long of play. I mean, that's a massive amount of time that just really get engaged.
Because that's a child's need in play, right? Like that's like, and Ms. Chung, what she often says is like, we respond to provide materials and environments based on what we observe children need in play. So if a child needs to roll and they don't have enough things to roll with, you respond with providing more materials for them to roll with, right? So there's just this frame of rights, like the child's right to love or to joy, but also of seeing and then reflecting on what children's needs are in that sense. Something that's really interesting that I was talking to Ms. Chung about as well is that, you know, we hear a lot this term playful learning, and I don't think there's a real clear definition of what that means. Sometimes the way I think about it is like making a lesson fun, which I think is different than play. What Ms. Chung talks about is she talks about the spirit of play. And so she says that in the routines, in hand washing and in eating and in drawing up, they do reading stories where children draw stories of what's been read to them, where they take notes about the plants they're growing, they take notes about the weather. She says that's not play. Like they haven't decided to do that. We've decided they're going to do that. But she describes the spirit of play, which is that it's as self-determined as possible, that children have mastery over it, that they're deciding what marks they're using to draw the plants. They decide really, you know, whether or not they want to do it. It's expected they do. But there's this idea that things that aren't play can still respond to children's needs, provide them with a space for mastery, give them space to do it, and not be based on an expected outcome. Like just being based on the process of doing something and of using one's own means of doing it. And so I think one of the reasons those transitions are so smooth, one of the reasons you can have that degree of structure that I think makes the play even more rich, right? Because they have mastery over everything else around that play. Like that ownership is in play, but it's in every aspect of their day. It's in every aspect of their environment. That I don't think those things are disconnected. Like I don't think the routines are disconnected from the richness and the complexity and the self-regulation in play. Like I don't think that children putting back their materials is simply labeling them correctly. It also has to do with being in a space where you're expected to serve your own lunch, where you're expected to wash your own hands, where you're expected to note the weather, but in whatever way you want, just as long as you take care of that thing.
Yeah, and it sounds like, you know, they differentiate between some teacher-initiated activities and child in it. And there's so much child-initiated activities that the teacher-initiated ones don't seem so bad, right? Because there's still a lot of room for children to determine within those teacher-initiated activities how they want to proceed, right? And that, yeah, we know that children need that, right? There are some things that children need teachers to initiate, teachers to, it helps them, right, to get it. Like some things they're not going to pick up because doesn't come natural unless someone tells them that, right? So it's okay. And I tell you, you can still be a person of play, but also do a teacher-led or teacher-initiated moment if you give them kind of some freedom within that activity. And it sounds like that's definitely, and we did see some play indoors, and, you know, they were clay and other things, right? They were happening in the side, and it seemed like that's where they wanted to be in that moment. Like it didn't, you know, it also didn't feel like it wasn't the experience they were hoping to have that day, right?
And I think that's something else that like differentiates it is, yeah, there's, you know, children are keeping track of the weather or plants or that kind of stuff, but it's not like everybody's doing that at the same time. It's like, hey, in the course of a day, these are the expectations for you. We hope that you like look at the weather and make a record. We hope that you look at your plants and take care of it. We hope that, you know, these different things happen. but it's not like everybody's doing everything at the exact same time. And then we move on to the next activity. So if you really want to play with indoor like materials indoors, you can play with those materials indoors. And then, you know, after lunch, maybe I'm going to go take care of my plant because I haven't done that today. And so it's also having like the freedom to choose when those things happen. And I'm not saying that that freedom happens at all times. There's definitely still read alouds where the entire group comes together, and there's definitely teacher-led activities where everybody's coming together at once. But where is that freedom to have children decide when they want to do things? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if they're looking at the weather at the beginning of the day, the end of the day, or they're watering the plant first thing they get there at the end of the day. It's the fact that, you know, those are the things that they need to do when they're doing them, and turning over that power to them and that freedom to them for, you know, we trust you to decide when's right for you and when you feel like that's something that's, you know, important to you.
Yeah, and we don't, I mean, if you think about it, we don't get, maybe, I don't know, maybe when you get to high school, you're allowed to pick a subject, right? But then you get to college and the freedom is so there, right? We wonder why children struggle sometimes in that first year of college because they've been given so much freedom they never had before, right? And you mentioned something earlier, Jesse, about Ms. Chung and preparing the kids for primary school. You know, I still think, and I hope that you guys will look at this, I believe that if you look at the parents, the adults who went through RNG, when as children and now they're adults, and you compare them to maybe to adults who didn't have that experience, you're going to see some incredible things, right? I just have to believe that that foundational experience came through somehow in their adult years. One, they probably put their kids back in there because they're like, yeah, this is really good for our children, right? But like there are benefits, right, to that kind of way. And it might not be, I'm not saying they're the richest and famous adults now, right? But there's probably a sense of joy and contentment and happiness in their lives, and really deep engagement. You know, Peter Gray talks about, I think that was his book about unschooled, right? The unschooled learning, and how the people who had those opportunities, right, they become adults who are just fully engaged in their work because they spent all of their time in school, unschooling, being fully engaged in whatever they're doing. So now they're able to do that. And I wonder if that's, you know, if that's what we're going to see when we kind of look at the people who grew up through the Anji play.
Well, I think that there's this tremendous irony, which is like, you know, there's this move towards like 21st century skills, like problem solving, executive functioning. And the reason they're moving to that is because they've decided that the previous outcomes that were defined are outcomes of the past. And so they're going to predict what is going to be necessary in the future, and they're going to turn to companies to tell them how they hire people. And so the future outcomes are still just based on what the market is expected to want from like good employees in the future. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, right? And so like the ability for a child to handle uncertainty, to solve, to just be a person that can like handle what's going on around them in some sense is like kind of what we're looking at. But I would say, you know, in Guizhou province, there's a joint UNICEF Ministry of Education, this is in China, project in a very rural, very much like, you know, in pretty dire poverty in that area. And they've started extending, they're doing an Anji Play early childhood program, but now they've extended it into the first year of primary school in a couple of classes. And the initial evidence in terms of like reading and literacy, in terms of comparing the children in that first year of primary with just play and like doing play stories, doing play sharing, like no real addition of curricular components, that because the expectations of the first year in primary in terms of math and reading aren't really that high. It's not like kids in that first year are expected to write books and like do complex mathematics, that like they're scoring like much higher than they were in the years previous. And that's, you know, really early data, but it's still there. I do want to go back to this idea of like playful learning, the spirit of play, et cetera. The reason that Ms. Chung makes it really clear that other stuff that's happening in Anji schools is not play, I think is because she sees the danger of, again, that really murky definition of what play is. So suddenly, like drawing a picture of a plant is play. And so, okay, we're not going to have free play outside, but we're going to have kids drawing plants inside. So we're a play-based program. Or, you know, oh, talking over kids while they're playing is a form of play. And so we're a play-based program. And so in a way, it's like Ms. Chung says, well, true play, false play, like we're just saying that because people aren't really thinking about play in a clear way. Like in some sense, you could just say like the child's natural trajectory of like understanding themselves and the world in a place of safety is what they should be doing. Like we don't even need to call that play, right? But we have to use these words because there aren't those clear distinctions. And so there's this big risk in making the definition of play so broad that anything can be play, because then it's like, well, then what is our mission, right?
Yeah, And I think that's important too. And I think, again, it's those characteristics that you want to highlight, right? That self-determined is a really big part of it, right?
Yeah.
Intrinsically motivated, self-selected, right? You know, you're engaging because you want, you have the freedom to enter and come and go as you please. No one's going to say, no, you can't, you have to stay here, right? I remember when I taught kindergarten, we were, it was part of the curriculum, but like we wanted them to make a choice and stay in that choice. So when you picked your center, you weren't allowed to leave. Like in pre-K 3 and pre-K 4, you can run around as long as the space isn't too full, which I think is hilarious now when I think about it, right? You get to determine when that space is too full. If you can fit 22 little bodies in that little space, then that's not you guys, right? But that wasn't, of course, our mindset, right? But those kids were free to run around the room and do, but when we were told for kindergarten, no, we want them to learn the value of making a choice and sticking with that choice for 45 minutes, right? And so we were imposing what we thought they needed to get out of it, right? And that then it took away. Was that really play then? When you said, oh, I want to go to blocks, and then you got bored in 10 minutes, and I said, no, you got to stay there, man. You got to stay there until the end, right? That's not play, right? Why can't you go somewhere else and do something else when you feel like it, right? So yeah, I think it's important to think about those characteristics in the limitations, right? If there are any limitations there. I don't see a lot of limitations in Anji, right? Because again, the idea that the materials are selected because they take away a lot of those limitations, right? The space is kind of laid out. I remember asking like, well, they seem to stay together in their groups, but are they free to go somewhere else? And they are, if they tell a teacher, right, that they want to go over to this area of the class, of this place today, then they can do that, right? And so I think, you just have to be really aware. But I think it's important. We shouldn't call drawing a picture of your plant play. It's not. It's an activity that the teacher has suggested you should do at some point, yeah. Right? Because it's part of what we want you to learn, which is taking care of a plant. We want you to document that. But even the play stories, right? The play sharing, right? And the play stories, how much of that is a response to the play, but isn't exactly play itself, right? And it is being, something you're encouraged to do for a different set of reasons, right?
But it's also like the children don't mind that though. Like that is a teacher directed activity because it's about what they found most important. They got to play and got to do what they wanted, and now they get to share it with everyone. Like who doesn't want to like have their work that they find really important validated every single day? Like what you did was the most important thing, and now show us why it was the most important thing.
I mean, yeah, and I guess some people it's still an imposition, but I think it's one that they all seem to, like you said, they seem to enjoy it, they seem to love it, and it's part of the process, right? It's part of the, not only do I get to do what I want, but then like you said, I get to draw about it, reflect on it, talk about it, and you value it so much, right? And I'm sure that happens in other spaces where they don't draw about it, but it works for them. It really works. Like it just seemed like that's just the way that it flows there, and the kids enjoy it and the adults enjoy it, and it's a good system, right? But there's a lot of those characteristics that you talked about that are present that make those kinds of activities, yes, they're not play, but they're also they're not asking too much of the children, right? They seem to go hand in hand with the experience.
I mean, and truthfully, like if a child doesn't want to share that day or they don't want to draw a play story, sure, it's an expectation, but the teacher's not going to force them to do it. Like they probably have a really good reason that they don't want to capture it for that day. And so, the teacher will talk to them and then they'll just let them do what they need to do for that day, understanding that, some days I might not want to reflect either. Like my head is full of other things, and that's okay. You don't have to, you're not forced to do anything that doesn't make sense for you that day. And I feel like that is the greatest form of trust. Like we're trusting these children to know themselves so well that they can actually say to a teacher like, hey, actually today's not the day I'm going to write a play story because I'm just not feeling it today. And the teacher's like, you know what, I get it. Like I trust that you're gonna, like I trust your decision.
Yeah, and that's we don't have a lot of trust and faith then. And it's funny, I was posting right when the COVID-19 started happening, and I was posting, oh, we just need to let kids play. And I mean, the first comment someone said, kids need to do inquiries and projects, not just play. And I'm like, what do you think play is? Play is inquiry, play is project, right? And then he was like, oh, okay, you're right. But someone else, and I forgot the thread of the conversation, but he said, how are they going to learn if we don't teach them? And I'm like, you think children need to be taught to learn? And he's like, don't you? And I said, no, children learn all the time. Our teaching sometimes gets in the way of that natural learning. Like I truly believe children left to their own devices are capable of doing a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, Denisha, there was like an interesting thought exercise that I did once, and I'm like, what do children actually need us to teach them? I'm like, well, like in China, like water's not potable. So maybe like teaching them that they can't drink water out of the faucet, that's probably something you want to teach them. But like besides things like that, I couldn't really think of anything that needed to be directly taught as long as they were in an environment that is supportive and really sees them and sees what their interests are. And like, you know, like you were saying, like brings more planks in if they're noticing that maybe that they need more of those in the space and are as long as it's really responsive to children, like I don't really feel like the adult needs to teach them all that much.
No, but then again, that's not the role, right, that we've been prepared for, whether it's as parents sometimes or it's even, as teachers, we're not prepared for this idea that you're even the word teaching, right, that we set up, and it's so, I think it's, and I would love to hear, how Ms. Chung thinks about that, right? Because I think the relationship between the adult and the child is not what we consider a teaching relationship, right? And it's a little bit of like Paulo Freire's getting away from the banking method of education and this idea, but it's even, it's still, I think there's something that I think I want her to name it. I want her to tell me what it is and to define it for us from her perspective of all the work she's done, because I don't think it's been defined that way, and it can't, because it's a totally different experience. But I would love to hear more about that, because I think it's definitely a shift, right? The adult child relationship is not the traditional teacher student relationship that we think it is.
Yeah, and I think that would be great. Maybe the next call we can have you interview Miss Chung, and then I do the interpreting. That would be great. The one thing I hear her saying over and over again is just the teacher discovering the child discovering the world. And so just that act of discovery and reflection, I think she talks a lot about creating conditions, that we can look at how that might be different or similar to the idea of like sort of the environment as the third teacher. But there's this idea in Chinese that Miss Chung often says, which is wu wei er wei, which is like the best teachers are those that aren't actively like that you create the conditions for what's supposed to happen, and then like it just kind of happens, right? It's kind of like that's the kind of that art, right, or that magic.
That's the art of the teaching, right? You're doing some stuff, but you're not leading, you're not guiding, you're just, that idea of creating conditions so children can discover what it is they need to discover, right? And that is, I think that's definitely something there. And but again, for me, moving forward in this work, it just requires then thinking, how do we prepare teachers for that? How do we shift that mindset? I mean, that's going to be the challenge moving forward, because it's so important, right? I think it is. I mean, I believe it is important. I think teachers want to do it, and some get it. Those who are doing, they kind of step back. They realize I don't have to run in there and solve all their problems. Like, until you draw blood, handle this, right? Like that's a really big, I know there's some teachers I follow in this great Play Empowers group that they get that, right? That's actually their role, is to not rush in, to give them the space to kind of handle conflicts and issues and make decisions, right? And that's really powerful. And to get other teachers to embrace that role too, I think is really important.
And I think,
go ahead, Jesse.
I was just going to say that for us, and I'll make this really brief, is that like a big lesson for us is like the administration of a school is so critical in creating the space of safety for the teachers to make that shift. Like the administration has to remove all those other demands and requirements. They have to create the space where teachers are coming together to reflect together once a week as a group and every day as a teaching team. Like they have to create.
Before that, the teachers have to feel safe. Like they have to know when their lunch breaks are. They have to know that they're going to go home at 5 o'clock. They have to like be in a situation where they're not worried about themselves, and they really can focus all that energy on the children that are in front of them.
Yeah, so it's a shift. It's not just the teachers, right? Because and that's a big part of the big frustrating part of teacher ed. And I was talking to a class at Florida International University yesterday, and I said, we are preparing teachers for the schools we want, not the schools we have. And that's, we've getting pushback. Teacher ed gets pushback from public schools because of that. They want people who are going to come out and be test proctors and who are going to manage behaviors and who are just going to do canned curriculum. And most of us in teacher ed aren't about that, right? We're preparing you to be the teachers for the schools we want in the future, right? Where you get to, focus on the things that matter and teach engaging hands-on curriculum and model, best practices and explore, social issues, right, in the classroom. And so that becomes a challenge as well too. And if you're not supported, I always tell students when you're interviewing them for that job, right? They're not just interviewing you, you have to find out, are they going to support you in your efforts to do this kind of work? Because if they're not, that's a big red flag, right? You're not going to have that safety that you need to do this kind of work, right? And I think we're seeing that where Elizabeth is going to her different schools and she's trying to bring the Ganji work play there. I think, and even Emma in her school, everyone, right? I mean, look at, in Wisconsin and Madison, they have the buy-in from the top, but there are still challenges, right, to getting that done that way, right? And so I think, yeah, to that point, you definitely need everyone to create the environment for that.
Yeah.
And there's also, I feel like, a huge difference between wanting that change to happen and then actually making that change happen from within you, right? Because it sounds really brilliant. Like, who doesn't want this for all children, right? But then you have to really reflect on yourself, your program, all the like systems that are put in place to see what's really preventing that from happening. And that's hard work. Like, it really takes a huge investment to be able to do that.
A lot of interests, like a lot of big level interest, universities, and getting academics to publish as a product, like teacher training and selling books. That there's a lot of fear and a lot of like obscurantism, like a lot of lack of clarity, because it creates captive people who have to turn to somebody for that safety. They have to turn to something outside of the child in front of them or themselves for the safety of what they're supposed to do. And so, like, if you're a teacher and you need to take that leap from that ladder of like believing in a child, at your best, you have a director that's holding the ladder still for you, so you can take that leap. Saying, don't worry about all that other stuff everybody's telling you. Like, what's happening with that kid? That there's these systemic things that make things bad for kids, and similarly, they make things bad for teachers, and they make things bad for academics who have to, do all these things that they're expected to do to keep their positions. Like, there's all these extractive systems that thrive on the fear of scarcity and like the lack of clarity about what anyone's supposed to be doing at any given time. And I don't want to end on such a negative.
No, I don't want to end on, but I think what you're saying is that we have to, and I got this as well from the speakers, right? It's a full systems change, right? Ms. Chung had a lot of freedom to do what she did, and then she had to bring everyone along, and it took time and it took practice. So, like, you have to get that foundational investment. You can't just think you're going to one-off this and do this, right? And we see that in a lot of different areas, right? I have a colleague who was a high school Spanish teacher. She's trained in restorative practices in her school, so she does it with her students, but she's like the only one. So now, like, the rest of the teachers, most of them hate her because the students do really well in her class and not in theirs, and they're looking at the other teachers like, why aren't you doing what she does, right? So it creates this environment then now you're at odds. But if the whole school would just buy into what she was doing, it would benefit everybody, right? But she doesn't have that buy-in, and she's trying. So when you try and work in that silo in your classroom, like, it's hard, right? It's really hard if you don't have, like you said, someone holding the ladder and say, no, I got your back, go out and do this, and I'm going to support you. And I was talking to some folks yesterday, and they're like, well, how do we get people to buy into play? I'm like, you got to let them play. I was like, you got to take out that material. Like, I had to get on that thing and stand on it. I had to jump off that thing when a little girl brought me up to jump off of a thing in China, and I was kind of like, at the last minute, I got scared, and I tried to turn around, and she was behind me going, stay. And then the other people were down there cheering me on. And that's like gave me the confidence to literally just jump. And it wasn't even that high, but I mean, come on, like, I'm old enough to know that I'm not like, that was scary. And so, but you had to do it. You had to get out there and do it. I mean, I didn't last long on the roly things, but I tried, right? And you have to feel it. And so, we have to take this revolution to the people that are keeping it out, right? We have to get them to remember. I think if everyone could just remember how much joy play brings, right, they would be all for it, and so parents, administrators, I want legislators, all sorts of people, get the custodians out there, get the cafeteria workers out there, get everyone out there to do the play so that they can be like, okay, social workers, I mean, everyone, so that they can see how important it is. And that's how you're going to get that buy-in that you're really going to need to move forward. So let's hope that we can do it somehow.
I think that's a really great place to end. Just like, let's bring joy to people's hearts and let that change come from there.
Always. Yes, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Denisha.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
You too. Thanks.
I'll see you.
Yeah.